Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I am joined by Rashun, the Director of Philanthropy over at Vogel. Just remind everybody at Charity Charge, our mission is to power yours outside of the podcast and vlog series that we do. We do that through equitable access to financial tools and services. If that sounds like it would help, please do reach out to us. Rashun, thank you for coming on. Vogel is addressing family homelessness in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Tell me a little bit more about kind of the work you're doing out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Grayson. And glad to be here. Vogel has been around for quite some time, and we have been addressing family homelessness with the intention of all things begins with the child.
Mm.
And so we are very intentional about our educational institutions providing child care, early child care education to the children in conjunction to the wraparound services. And in the words of our CEO, we are not just trauma informed, but we're trauma responsive. And so we're having a lot of impact. We're just open to new locations and we're continuing to expand how we're navigating this journey.
That is incredible. And on that impact note, I read that y'all have over 19,000 youth that have come through Vogel since its inception. That is just
Yes.
astonishing. Tell me a little bit more about that and how that's been.
Yeah, it's been a journey. And I think our CEO, Karen, has done a very good job at pivoting the organization strategically so that we can expand into what's next. We were just looking at some recent reports of how it was that we served roughly about 300 and something children one year, and then the next year, 500 and something children. And so there are leaps and bounds that's affording us this opportunity. But what I think is really big is people are becoming more aware that people, such as children, are homeless. About
Mm.
4,000 children every night are going to bed not knowing where they're going to bed. And so we're really big on spreading the word, the message, and igniting people's fire to have the same passion that we have about really protecting our children.
Tell me a little bit more about the services themselves. You mentioned you have two locations. What can a child coming into the Vogel services kind of expect?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we think of early childhood education, typically I have to really acknowledge the fact that we are not a daycare center, but the services that we're providing, number one, is the mental health services. About any type of therapy you could think of, children are receiving at Vogel, from play therapy, food therapy, behavior therapy, the ability to really, really dive deep into the life of the child to ensure that we put them on the right path. And we have just powerful caseworkers that journey with our children. In addition to that, we understand that the only way to break this family poverty systematic line is we also have to really engage the parent, and we offer those same mental health services to parents. We offer an employment opportunity center, staying late hours to ensure that parents are being able to be employed, get their education, and ensure that we're breaking the systematic flow of poverty. In addition to that, very high level education. Lots of our children have to take the same assessment that the state takes when it's time to transition to kindergarten, and our children are passing those same assessments. I really, really believe that there's a robust aspect to this program. And my last but not least aspect to this is we're early childhood to table, which means most of all of our food is grown right there on our property, which is really, really big because we understand dealing with the brain, the fuel to that aspect is what we're feeding our children. So it's really imperative that we're able to do that. And if I'm not mistaken, talking today with our chef, over 300 some thousand meals are going out every year to
Wow.
children at our three locations. So it's a really robust program. We would be entitled a private school if we were not a nonprofit, just because of the types of services that we offer.
And on just the theme of homelessness, do y'all see that that kind of follows and that there's improvements as you address these kind of more underlying problems and the kind of the systematic inefficiencies there? How are y'all seeing those services kind of affect?
Yeah, most definitely. The whole goal is that every child will have a home, self-sufficient family, and the foundations for success in school and in life. And I think we're seeing that. But we have three locations. Our main location would be deemed our ICU location, and then we have a north location that is partnered with another organization, and that's more critical care because there's actually a shelter there,
Hmm.
Family Gateway. And then we have a third location, which is our Redbird location, and it's more so of our graduation location. At this point, parents are being able to take on a small fee for their childcare, and they're more stable positions. So to speak to what you're saying, we just graduated about 30 something families from the ICU location to that stable location. So I think that speaks to the progression that we're seeing, not just in the child, but the family, because it's imperative that we're not just pushing them to thrive in homelessness, but to become stabilized and thrive in life and in school. So we're definitely seeing how these services are impacting our families.
And that's just a great way of approaching it. And the two generational approach, which is I know something that y'all champion. I'd love to dive into your background within the nonprofit space and kind of the journey that led you to be the director of philanthropy today.
Yeah, I had an interesting introduction to nonprofits. I've always been in the faith-based world, just growing up as a child. However, my aspirations was to be an elementary teacher.
Mm,
And so I took my turn in education and then I transitioned, got my master's at St. Thomas University, and then was afforded the opportunity to take on a chief financial officer slash development role with a company called Gulf Coast Center of Nonviolence, which is located in Mississippi. Some time there, and then I expanded and brought in myself and got with the Salvation Army for quite some time. And then I ended up here in Dallas. It was only right that I continued to expand. Currently, I'm finalizing my doctorate degree in innovation and organizational leadership because I do want to continue to offer the nonprofit world the same level of corporate expertise that corporate has.
mm,
So I was then afforded the opportunity to interview with Vogel, and it made sense from a cultural perspective, expertise perspective, and a future perspective. I'm so humbled to be a part of the Vogel team, and it's a very high performing team, and so I'm honored to be a part.
Well, I would love to dive into the state of philanthropy today. Uh, you know, there's a lot of changes going on. As you've stepped into kind of the director of philanthropy, how has it been in terms of navigating grants, navigating donors, navigating daily givers versus your big institutional donors? Tell me a little bit more about how that is specifically for Vogel and how it has been navigating as you've stepped into this new role.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely evolved since COVID, according to statistics, like the way people like to give, the way people are giving. But here's the key, people have not stopped giving. And so the methodology has definitely changed and shifted, and the approach has shifted. And with Vogel, one of the things that I truly love is Karen actually has just expanded their development department. Prior, it was not a major gifts department. And so, understanding the demand to keep funding the expansion of the vision, she opened it up to that aspect. And so, with that comes the readdressing of systems, the readdressing of structure, the readdressing of how we approach donors. Who's always given at a certain level, now desiring them to expand. We use something called the CARE model, which is the keep, attain, reach, and then expand model that really affords us the opportunity to address different donors based on where they are, and how donors like to give. Just from my own consultancy aspects of things, I think donors are just like the four seasons of the year. And depending on what season you catch them in determines how you approach when the ask is made and how you navigate that relationship. But I'll leave with this. I think the most important aspect of philanthropic work right now is that though there's in organizations that we don't allow the urgency of the organization to turn relationship dynamics into transactional dynamics, just so that we have some sense of financial longevity as we're growing with the people that love to give to us.
So, well, tell me a little bit more about that, right? Because that is one aspect of the nonprofit world that is so unique and amazing is the relationship, that donor relationship. How do you nurture that? And how are you keeping and growing those donor relationships within?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is relationships require reciprocity. And many times, as nonprofits, because there's such a need and that urgency for the impact that we want to make, sometimes we can become so quickly transactional, looking for the next check, the next dollar, or the next donor to give. But it requires you to really cultivate the dynamics of that relationship. And I ask people all the time, was the last time you talked to your donors and did not need anything from them? Because those moments are extremely crucial as you start thinking about the moment you want to ask. It's more easier to ask someone you know for money than someone who's completely a stranger. So retention is important because it's harder to attain a donor than it is to retain a donor. So I tell people all the time, while attaining new donors is a big part of what you want to do when you expand, retaining those ones you have is crucial. And so, of course, you have the 80 rule, but some seasons that change, that you spend more time cultivating than you do reaching for new. And then other seasons you spend more time reaching for new than you do cultivating. But the durability and the sustainability of those relationships will really determine what your revenue looks like. According to statistics, subscription based donorship is where a lot of people are going. So, understanding stewarding people that are giving consistently is going to be beneficial more than you trying to transactionally find that one person that gives $10,000. And from a subscription based standpoint, they're staying on the books 3 to 4 years. So I think that comes from cultivation. So I always encourage people two things: never to forget to say thank you, and don't forget to talk when you're not asking.
And on that subscription point, I mean, I'm sure it would have to work for nonprofits if we're seeing it work so well for businesses, right? Like Netflix and Amazon. Everyone's moving towards subscription, so it makes sense that state of giving is moving that direction as well. As statistically, we're seeing that that's leading to a higher donor per per individual. So that's incredible. Yeah, just really on that note too. So it's so important to keep track of donors. Is there any tools that y'all use in terms of donor management that y'all find really incredible and helpful?
Yeah, so currently we are definitely Team Salesforce, and that's what we're kind of using to navigate currently. But I think also in addition to that, you could never die with more spreadsheets than you ever need. And so I tell my team all the time, I love our CRM system, but I do think there are specific things that I use from an Excel standpoint to ensure that every relationship is uniquely designed, and I never want to forget something that's crucial to the people that I'm connecting with. So I do tell people technology is great, but there are times that technology is not favorable. So always having something backed up to ensure that you're still able to navigate those relationships. And I'll say this because I think it's crucial. It's crucial. There's such a high turnover rate in the development industry, and the fundraising industry. So I do think it's imperative for organizations to not forget that as you're bringing in new people, if you don't have anything to pass them, it's hard for them to cultivate what you have. So ensuring that there is backup keeps of the information for donors and people and corporations is crucial so that you can ensure that you're able to pass that on to whoever may need to have the impact with that relationship.
Yeah, elaborate a little bit more about that. You bring up the point of high turnover. Expand upon kind of what you mean by that.
Yeah, there's a what I would call a exhaustion in the industry, just because giving looks different. But however, also I sometimes think when it comes to this particular industry, there's not also an equal balance of checking in on the mental health of the people who have to hold up the budget of the house. And I think they are human beings, they're people. And I think organizations have to consider that the development department is not a robot. It's not a, they're not a machine. And we're still at the risk of the donor. I can ask 50 times and they can say no, but it doesn't mean I did not do my job properly to be able to make that ask. And so I think it's very imperative that executive directors really put some intentionality on checking in on their teams and making sure that their people are just as good as the gift they want the people to ask for. I tell people all the time in the social services world, it's just as important to check on your staff because remember the staff is equal to the people they're serving. So if you're checking on the people you're serving, there should be an equal consideration for the quality of way you're checking on your staff. So definitely high turnover, but I do think there's a new group and a new generation of people that are going to enter the industry that's going to bring just even some greater stability and a little bit more innovation and creativity to what's happening.
I mean, so the kind of two sides of that you kind of mentioned is having like the systems in place to enable smooth transition when that staff turnover does happen, and then that second piece is keeping them there as long as you can. I'd like, what are some kind of lessons or advice that you've seen within the space for kind of staff retention within the nonprofit world? It's a constant battle because you're competing with the higher salaries that you can see within the corporate sector. Obviously, it's more mission aligned people that come into the nonprofit space, but how do you keep your team aligned and how do you actually retain that talent over a period of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think retention comes through relationship. As many times, it's so easy to become siloed in the nonprofit world because everybody's executing. But I'll never forget one of the nonprofits I worked for. One of the things that was really big is our executive director was very intentional about really knowing the needs of her team. Vogel is really good on this. We have one-on-ones, we have team meetings, but there's something we do in our team meetings that's crucial is we have an L10 meeting, and we're supposed to give a personal number and we give a corporate number or a organizational number of how we're doing. And based on that number determines now how our management checks on us beyond us as a employee, but us as a person. And I think that's crucial to navigating in this world is that we cannot negate to have healthy relationships and healthy culture around the work that we're doing if we're wanting to retain people because I'm willing to take a lesser salary in a lesser stressful environment.
That's the differentiator that
Yes.
that the nonprofit space can allow and enable.
Yes. Definitely. So I think if you have a poor culture, it's more easier to say, "Hey, this is what we don't have, but this is what we do have." And I think that's crucial as you're building in these environments.
And to use those strengths to your advantage in terms of retaining talent. I absolutely love that. That's a great answer. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up, as we look to the end of this year going to next year, y'all have a big event on the horizon, 2025, the Day One DFW. Tell me a little bit more about that event.
Yeah, so Day One DFW is one of our hugest events in the DFW area. We typically see anywhere between 3 to 5,000 families at this event. We wanted to do something different. Everybody does galas and luncheons and all the things, but we wanted to do something specifically around families. And so January the 1 of 2020 are at the Urban Convention Center on all 4 floors, and there's all kinds of activities for children and families to experience, and it's a very powerful event. I can't do justice talking about it. It's one of those things you have to experience. But we see families from all over the DFW area on that day one experience. Because typically there's nothing to do for families. While you may have adults that can do their thing and children go to their friends' houses, but this really allows the family to emerge together and experience impact. And this is also an opportunity for sponsors, people who are wanting to get their brand out there, for families to see the things that they bring to our community, to partner and to become vendors and have that same experience and activate on site. So it's very much so a very impactful event.
Incredible. Well, and the final note we'll end on, if there's one piece of advice that you could give for maybe other director of philanthropies, other directors in the nonprofit space, what's one note that you would maybe end on?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've been telling people is never lose yourself while gaining others. I think it's important in the nonprofit world, the philanthropic world. It's really pivotal. And I use a method called raising P to the third power. We plan, we prioritize, then we pursue. And a part of that planning piece is not to forget who you are and what you've been called to do as an individual as you're navigating these philanthropic.
Incredible. Rashawn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing more about your work. Again, for our audience that's listening in, I hope that y'all were able to take some valuable insights and advice from his experience as a leader of philanthropy and also just as a nonprofit and executive leader in general. There was some really great stuff that we talked about today. Once again, I want to remind everybody that outside of this, if there is anything that y'all could use help on in terms of equitable access to financial tools, please reach out to us here at Charity Charge. Rashawn, thank you for coming out. And everybody, go out if you're in the DFW area to their big event on New Year's Day. Thank you for coming on and sharing more about you and your organization.
Thank you so much, Grace, and I appreciate the opportunity.